Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Imagine being one of the most famous boxers in the world, but someone still looks down on you because of how you dress or where you come from. That's exactly what happened to Manny Pacquiao one day, and the way he handled it left everyone speechless. It was supposed to be a routine day for Manny Pacquiao as he prepared to board a luxury private jet. Dressed casually in a simple t-shirt and jeans, he didn't look like someone who could afford such extravagance. The Filipino boxing legend had always maintained his humble appearance despite his incredible success in the ring and in politics. His unassuming nature was one of the qualities that made him beloved by millions around the world. But on this particular day, his humility would be put to the test by someone who couldn't see past appearances. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who don't feel the need to show off their status or wealth to others. The trouble began when Manny approached the exclusive terminal for private jets. The employee at the front desk, a young man in his 20s with slicked back hair and an expensive suit, barely looked up from his computer when Manny stood before him. "Can I help you?" he asked dismissively, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Manny politely explained that he was there to board his scheduled flight. The employee finally looked up, his eyes scanning Manny from head to toe, taking in his simple attire and unassuming demeanor. A smirk formed on the young man's face as he leaned back in his chair. "Sir, this area is for private jet clients only," he said with a condescending tone that made it clear he didn't believe Manny belonged there. "The regular terminal is back that way," he added, pointing toward the main airport building with a flick of his wrist. Manny wasn't a stranger to this kind of treatment. Throughout his career, he had faced similar prejudice when people didn't recognize him or underestimated him based on his appearance or background. Coming from extreme poverty in the Philippines, he had fought his way to the top of the boxing world through sheer determination and talent. He had become not just a champion, but a national hero and congressman in his home country. Yet here he was, being judged by a young employee who couldn't see beyond his casual clothes. Manny could have immediately revealed his identity or called for a manager, but that wasn't his style. Instead, he remained calm and collected, deciding to handle the situation with the same grace and dignity that had characterized his entire career. He smiled gently at the employee, not showing any sign of offense or anger at the disrespectful treatment. "I understand there might be some confusion," Manny said quietly, still maintaining his polite demeanor despite the employee's rudeness. "But I do have a reservation for the private jet today." The employee's smirk grew even wider as he let out a small laugh. "Look, sir, these jets cost thousands of dollars per hour to charter. I don't think you understand what kind of service this is." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, and a few other employees nearby started to take notice of the interaction. One of them, an older woman who had worked there longer, widened her eyes as she began to recognize who was standing at their desk. She started to move toward them, sensing that her younger colleague was making a terrible mistake. But before she could intervene, the young employee continued his dismissive treatment, now speaking louder so others could hear. "Maybe you're lost or confused about the type of flight you booked. These are luxury services for executives, celebrities, and wealthy individuals. The minimum charter starts at around $5,000 per hour." He spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child who couldn't possibly understand. Manny nodded patiently, letting the young man continue his explanation without interruption. He had faced tougher opponents in the ring. This situation was merely another lesson in humility. The older colleague was now frantically trying to catch the young employee's attention, making gestures behind Manny's back. But the young man was too engrossed in his own sense of superiority to notice anything unusual. Meanwhile, the terminal manager had been alerted to the situation and was hurrying over, a look of horror on his face as he recognized the famous boxer being treated so poorly by his staff. The young employee, still unaware of his massive mistake, was now pointing toward the exit. "So if you'd like to make your way back to the main terminal, they can help you find your correct flight there." His tone suggested he was doing Manny a favor by explaining this to him. Manny remained calm, his hands casually in his pockets as he observed the young man's behavior. Years of discipline in the boxing ring had taught him patience and self-control in the face of provocation. He could have easily become angry or defensive, but instead, he chose to use this as a teaching moment. The manager was now just steps away, preparing to intervene in what had become an increasingly embarrassing situation for the luxury jet company. Just as the manager reached them, another employee rushed forward with a folder in hand. "Mr. Pacquiao," she said respectfully, "your jet is ready for departure whenever you are." The young employee's face froze in mid-sentence, his smirk disappearing instantly as the name registered. Manny Pacquiao, 8-division world champion, one of the greatest boxers of all time, Filipino congressman, and multimillionaire. The color drained from the young man's face as he realized who he had been dismissing so rudely. The folder the female employee held contained the flight manifest, clearly showing that not only was Manny a passenger, he was the owner of the private jet that was parked on the tarmac. The terminal fell silent as everyone watched for Manny's reaction. Would he demand the employee be fired? Would he show anger after being treated with such disrespect? Instead of responding with anger, Manny did something that surprised everyone in the terminal. He smiled warmly at the now mortified employee and extended his hand. "It's nice to meet you. I'm Manny Pacquiao." His voice carried no hint of resentment or superiority, just the same humble tone he always used, whether speaking to presidents or ordinary people. The young employee, completely stunned, shook Manny's hand weakly, his mouth opening and closing without forming words. The manager stepped in, profusely apologizing for the treatment Manny had received. "Mr. Pacquiao, I am terribly sorry for this misunderstanding. Please, allow me to personally escort you to your aircraft." But Manny held up his hand gently to stop the manager's apologies. He wasn't interested in seeing anyone punished or making a scene. Throughout his life and career, he had always believed in treating others with respect, regardless of their status or behavior toward him. "There is no need for apologies," Manny said to the manager while the young employee stood frozen in embarrassment. "We all make assumptions sometimes. It's part of being human." The boxing champion then turned to address the young employee directly, speaking in a gentle tone that contained no anger, only wisdom. "The clothes we wear and the way we look don't always tell the full story of who we are." His words weren't just for the employee but for everyone listening in the terminal. It was a lesson in humility and respect that reflected Manny's own life philosophy and the values that had guided him from poverty to worldwide fame. The young employee, who moments before had been so condescending, now couldn't meet Manny's eyes, his face flushed with shame and regret. The contrast between his behavior and Manny's gracious response made the lesson even more powerful for everyone witnessing it. What happened next showed why Manny Pacquiao is respected not just for his boxing skills but for his character. Instead of walking away or letting the employee suffer in his embarrassment, Manny placed a hand on his shoulder. "What's your name?" he asked kindly. The young man, still visibly shaken, managed to stammer out, "James, sir, my name is James." Manny nodded and said something that would change James's perspective forever. "James, I grew up in a cardboard box in the Philippines. I had to drop out of school because my family couldn't afford it. I fought my way out of poverty one boxing match at a time." The terminal remained silent as people listened to Manny's words. Even those who knew his story were moved by hearing it directly from him in such a humble manner. James listened with wide eyes, the reality of his misjudgment sinking in deeper with every word Manny spoke. "The first time I went to buy a luxury car," Manny continued, "the salesperson ignored me completely. They thought I was wasting their time." He shared this story without bitterness, simply as a matter of fact. "But that salesperson lost a commission on a cash sale that day because they judged me by my appearance." James nodded slowly, beginning to understand the magnitude of the lesson. Manny wasn't trying to shame him but to help him grow from this experience. The boxer had always been known for his generosity and willingness to help others, even those who hadn't treated him well. It was part of his nature, shaped by his faith and his own experiences of being underestimated and overlooked. The manager and other employees watched in amazement as Manny turned what could have been an ugly confrontation into a moment of teaching and connection. "I'd like to invite you to come see the jet," Manny said to James, surprising everyone once again. "Maybe we can both learn something today." The invitation wasn't what anyone expected, least of all James, who looked up in shock. The manager started to protest, clearly thinking that James didn't deserve such kindness after his behavior. But Manny was firm in his decision. This wasn't about punishment or embarrassment. It was about growth and understanding. James hesitated, clearly unsure if he should accept given the circumstances. But Manny's genuine smile and the absence of any anger or resentment in his manner convinced the young man that the offer was sincere. Slowly, James nodded his acceptance, still too overwhelmed to speak properly. The two walked toward the tarmac together, an unlikely pair, the humble boxing champion and the employee who had just minutes ago dismissed him as unworthy. As they walked toward the luxury jet, James found his voice enough to offer a sincere apology. "Mr. Pacquiao, I'm so sorry for how I treated you. I made assumptions based on nothing." Manny nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "We all judge sometimes, James. The question is whether we learn from it." The boxer had faced far worse than rude service in his life, growing up in extreme poverty, fighting his way through the brutal world of professional boxing, and navigating the complex landscape of Filipino politics. A momentary slight from a misinformed employee barely registered on his scale of challenges. Yet he recognized this as an important moment for James, perhaps even a turning point. The lesson of looking beyond appearances and treating everyone with respect regardless of perceived status was one that Manny had lived by throughout his career. On board the jet, Manny introduced James to his team and family members who were traveling with him. Rather than treating the young man as an intruder or someone to be scorned, Manny included him in conversations and made him feel welcome. James remained quiet at first, still processing the extraordinary turn of events. He had gone from nearly throwing out one of the world's most famous boxers to being invited onto his private jet. The luxury aircraft was impressive, state-of-the-art technology, plush leather seats, and every amenity imaginable. But what struck James most wasn't the material wealth on display, but the warmth and humility of the man who owned it all. Manny chatted with his pilot and flight attendants as equals, asking about their families and listening with genuine interest to their responses. There was no hint of the self-importance or arrogance that James had encountered with other wealthy clients. Before James left the aircraft to return to his post, Manny shared a final thought that would stay with the young man forever. "Success isn't about what you have or how others treat you," the boxer said. "It's about how you treat others, especially when you think they can't do anything for you." He then handed James a signed boxing glove as a memento of their encounter. It wasn't meant as a souvenir of celebrity, but as a reminder of the lesson learned that day. James accepted it with trembling hands, overwhelmed by Manny's generosity of spirit. As he stepped off the aircraft, James was a changed person. The encounter had stripped away his superficial judgments and replaced them with a deeper understanding of true character and success. The boxing glove would become his most treasured possession, not because of its monetary value, but because of the powerful lesson it represented. When James returned to the terminal, his colleagues noticed an immediate change in his demeanor. The cocky, judgmental attitude was gone, replaced by a more thoughtful and humble approach to his work. In the days that followed, the story of Manny Pacquiao and the dismissive employees spread throughout the company and eventually made its way to social media. It became a powerful example of how to respond to prejudice and disrespect with dignity and grace. James never revealed the personal details of their conversation on the jet, keeping that experience private as a sign of respect for Manny, but he did share the general lesson he had learned. Never judge someone based on appearances, and always treat others with the same respect regardless of their perceived status or wealth. The story resonated with people around the world who had experienced similar judgment or who had been guilty of making the same kind of assumptions. Manny's response to being disrespected wasn't unusual for those who knew him well. Throughout his career, despite becoming one of the highest-paid athletes in the world, he had maintained his connection to his humble beginnings. He regularly gave away millions to help poor communities in the Philippines, building homes for the homeless and supporting educational initiatives for children who, like him, couldn't afford school. His political career was driven by the same desire to help others and create opportunities for those struggling in poverty. Even as his wealth grew, he never developed the arrogance or sense of entitlement that often comes with success. Manny could have easily demanded special treatment wherever he went. Most celebrities of his stature did, but he preferred to be treated like anyone else. This humility wasn't an act. It was deeply ingrained in his character and worldview. The encounter with James became just one of many stories that illustrated Manny's exceptional character outside the boxing ring. Sports journalists who covered his career often noted that as impressive as his athletic achievements were, it was his personal qualities that truly set him apart. Former opponents spoke with respect, not just about his punching power, but about his sportsmanship and dignity. Even after the most brutal fights, Manny showed respect for his opponents and never engaged in the kind of trash-talking that had become common in professional boxing. He carried himself with the same humble dignity whether he won or lost, understanding that true character is revealed not in victory but in how one handles defeat and challenges. The story of his interaction with the dismissive employee perfectly captured this aspect of his personality, responding to disrespect not with anger but with kindness and wisdom. 6 months after the incident, James received an unexpected package at the terminal. Inside was a ticket to Manny's next fight and a short handwritten note. "We all deserve second chances. Would be honored to have you as my guest, Manny." James was stunned by the gesture. Most people would have long forgotten such an encounter, especially someone with Manny's busy and high-profile life. But the boxer had remembered and was reaching out with yet another act of kindness. James immediately requested time off to attend the fight, an opportunity he never thought he would have. The terminal manager, who had witnessed James's complete transformation in the months following the Manny incident, happily approved the time off. James had become one of their most respectful and helpful employees, going out of his way to make every client feel valued regardless of their appearance or status. The lesson Manny had taught him had truly taken root and changed his approach to both his work and his life. The fight was spectacular, with Manny demonstrating the skill and power that had made him a legend in the boxing world. After his victory, James was invited backstage, another surprise he hadn't expected. When he entered Manny's dressing room, he found the boxer surrounded by his team, family, and various dignitaries. Yet Manny immediately spotted James and called him over, introducing him to everyone as "my friend from the airport." There was no mention of their first uncomfortable encounter, no hint that James had ever been anything but respected by the boxing champion. James was overwhelmed by the generosity of spirit that allowed Manny to not only forgive his disrespect, but to embrace him as a friend. It was a level of character that James had rarely encountered, and it reinforced the lessons he had learned that day at the terminal. In a quiet moment during the post-fight celebration, Manny pulled James aside for a brief conversation. "How are things at the terminal?" he asked with genuine interest. James explained how the encounter had changed him, how he now treated everyone with the same respect regardless of their appearance. Manny nodded in approval. "That's all I could hope for," he said. "We never know who someone is or what they've been through just by looking at them." It was a simple statement, but one that captured the essence of the lesson. James had learned to see beyond surface appearances to the humanity that connected everyone. He had discovered that true respect wasn't about responding to status or wealth, but about acknowledging the inherent dignity in every person. And he had learned this lesson not through punishment or humiliation, but through the extraordinary grace and humility of a man who had every reason to demand special treatment but chose kindness instead. The story of Manny Pacquiao and James continues to be shared as an example of how to respond to prejudice and disrespect with dignity. It teaches us that true character isn't revealed by how we treat those we admire or respect, but by how we treat those who have nothing to offer us or who have treated us poorly. Manny could have easily used his fame and status to have James fired or publicly humiliated. Many celebrities would have done exactly that, sharing the story on social media to showcase the disrespect they had faced and the consequences they had unleashed. But Manny chose a different path, one that reflected his deeper understanding of human nature and the power of second chances. He recognized that public shame or punishment wouldn't teach the lesson he wanted to impart. Only kindness and understanding could truly change someone's perspective and behavior. When asked in interviews about the incident, Manny always downplayed his role and emphasized the universal lesson. "We've all been judged unfairly at some point," he would say, "and most of us have judged others too quickly as well. The important thing is to learn from those experiences." His humility extended to how he told the story, never painting himself as a hero or James as a villain. Instead, he presented it as a human moment of misunderstanding and growth. This perspective reflected Manny's broader life philosophy, shaped by his experiences of poverty and struggle. He understood that people's behavior often stemmed from their own insecurities and limited perspectives rather than from deliberate malice. This understanding allowed him to respond with compassion rather than anger, with teaching rather than punishment. It was a philosophy that had served him well throughout his career, earning him respect far beyond his athletic achievements. James eventually left his job at the terminal to pursue higher education, something he had postponed for years. His encounter with Manny had inspired him to reconsider his life goals and priorities. He realized that the superficial markers of success, designer clothes, status symbols, and association with wealth that he had once valued were meaningless compared to true character and personal growth. In his application essay for university, James wrote about his experience with Manny Pacquiao and the profound impact it had on his worldview. He didn't hide his initial poor behavior but used it as a starting point to explain his transformation. The essay earned him not only admission but a scholarship dedicated to personal development and ethical leadership. James maintained contact with Manny over the years, sending occasional updates on his progress and expressing continued gratitude for the lesson he had learned that day at the terminal. The friendship that developed between Manny Pacquiao and James surprised many people who knew about their first encounter. It seemed unlikely that a world-famous boxer and politician would maintain a connection with someone who had once dismissed him based on appearances. But those who knew Manny well weren't surprised at all. Throughout his career, he had demonstrated an exceptional ability to look beyond surface interactions to see people's potential for growth and change. He believed firmly in second chances, having received many throughout his own journey from poverty to worldwide fame. The relationship served as a powerful reminder that meaningful connections can emerge from the most unexpected situations, even those that begin with misunderstanding and disrespect. It also illustrated how a moment of conflict, when handled with wisdom and grace, can transform into an opportunity for growth and understanding, rather than escalating into lasting animosity. Today, the story of Manny Pacquiao and the dismissive employee is often shared in customer service training sessions and leadership seminars. It serves as a powerful example of how prejudice based on appearances can lead to embarrassing mistakes and missed opportunities. But more importantly, it demonstrates how to respond to disrespect with dignity and how to turn a negative encounter into a teaching moment. Manny's approach, choosing education over humiliation, connection over confrontation, offers a model for dealing with similar situations in both professional and personal contexts. The story reminds us that our character isn't defined by how others treat us, but by how we respond to that treatment. Manny could have responded with anger, demands for special treatment, or calls for punishment. Instead, he chose to respond with humility, kindness, and wisdom, the same qualities that had guided him from a cardboard box in the Philippines to worldwide acclaim. In a world where social media often amplifies stories of celebrities demanding special treatment or responding to slights with public shaming, Manny Pacquiao's story stands out as a refreshing counterpoint. It shows that true power lies not in forcing others to respect you through fear or status, but in earning their respect through character and kindness. James learned this lesson firsthand, and his life was forever changed by the experience. He went from judging people based on their appearance to understanding that true worth has nothing to do with designer clothes or material possessions. Manny didn't need to assert his importance or demand recognition. His character spoke for itself in how he treated others, especially those who had shown him disrespect. This quiet strength made a far more lasting impression than any display of power or status could have achieved. It's a lesson we can all apply in our daily interactions, choosing to respond to judgment and disrespect with dignity rather than defensiveness. The most powerful aspect of this story isn't what happened that day at the terminal, but the ripple effects that continued long afterward. James didn't just change his own behavior, he shared his experience with colleagues, friends, and eventually students when he became a teacher after completing his education. The lesson he learned from Manny Pacquiao to look beyond appearances and treat everyone with respect became a cornerstone of his teaching philosophy. He would tell his students, "The way you treat the person you think can do nothing for you reveals your true character." This wisdom, passed on from Manny, touched countless lives as it spread from person to person. That's the remarkable thing about acts of genuine kindness and wisdom. They don't end with the initial interaction but continue to influence others in ways we may never fully know. Manny's response to disrespect that day created a positive chain reaction that continues to this day. As for Manny Pacquiao, the incident was just one of many that demonstrated his exceptional character outside the boxing ring. Throughout his career, he has used his platform and resources not for self-aggrandizement but to help others and promote positive values. His political career in the Philippines has been driven by the same desire to create opportunities for those struggling in poverty. He remains one of the most beloved figures in his home country, not just for his athletic achievements, but for his humility, generosity, and genuine concern for others. The story of his encounter with James perfectly captures these qualities and explains why Manny is respected worldwide, not just as a boxer, but as a person of remarkable character. In a world often fixated on material success and celebrity status, Manny Pacquiao offers a powerful reminder that true greatness lies in how we treat others, especially when we have nothing to gain from it.